This is my newest land listing, and whenever somebody calls to list land or to buy land, they have certain questions I'm going to answer here today. And one of the questions that they ask is, how come my land isn't worth the same as somebody's down the street that sold? Or how come they're asking that much for that piece of land? Is it really worth it? Those are the questions that we're going to ask. We're going to go over the things that you should look for when you're buying land, and things that can cause appreciation in land, and then things that can hinder appreciation. So we're going to go over all these things in this video today. You're going to learn a lot, so be sure to watch the whole video. If this is your first time tuning into the channel, I'm Teia Golden, and I sell real estate around McCall, Idaho. So if you have any questions about the area, definitely reach out and give me a call. I'm happy to help. So there are 4 categories that I look at when I'm reviewing a piece of land. And for me to remember it, I remember it as LRCC, and that's the location of the property, the rights that come with the property, the CC&Rs that are attached to it, and then the comps, properties that are just like it that might have sold recently. So the first one is location, and we're going to talk about, is it near the water? How close is it to town? The general location of the property determines some of the value. Is it located within the city of McCall, or is it going to be in the county side of Cascade? These different locations contribute some of the reason to the land's value. So let me give you an example. If homes in the neighborhood are selling for $600,000 to $700,000, and you have a certain cost to build, right? Your price per square foot to build, and the lot wouldn't be able to be worth $250,000 because the time that you build the home, you would be priced over what the properties are currently selling for. So that's going to reduce the price of your land. But if the homes are selling for, $1 million to $1.5 million, and you have the same price per square foot and maybe even the same building size, then the land value is going to increase. And so whenever I'm looking to price a property, not only am I looking at the land that is sold around the area, I'm also looking at what is developed in that area and how much it costs to build that, in order to make sure that if somebody buys the land, they can still be in a range where stuff is actually selling once they've finished construction. Another important thing about location are the views that the property might have. So the next thing we're talking about is the R, and that's your property rights. So when people are looking at land, especially larger chunks of land or farms, anything like that, you're going to be concerned about your water rights, and you're going to check those with the Department of Water Resources. And I have a whole nother video about water rights if you want to check that out. You're also going to check on your mineral rights. Sometimes the title company will have that information, and sometimes you're going to have to contact the Department of Land. If you're buying within a subdivision, usually they don't allow people to mine or dig up minerals, right? Because people want to know, if I'm buying land, how far deep into the core of the earth do I actually own? And that's going to be your mineral rights. It's another important thing to check on when you're buying land. The CC&Rs do cover some rights. So CC&Rs are going to limit the rights that you have to the property. Are you allowed to cut down trees and send those off to the timber mill? That's going to be a right that you can have to your property. And sometimes those are limited when you have CC&Rs. Another right that you're going to want to check is that you actually have the right to access your property. Is there a road coming into it that might cross? Do you have to cross through someone else's land to get to your property? Do you have the right to access it? Is there an easement? And what does that look like? Another thing, if somebody's buying a large tract of land, is I want to know how large that easement is and who issued the easement. Are they still around? Did it get transferred to somebody else, or does that easement run with the land? These are all important things to look at whenever you're buying a piece of property. So I was working with one guy, and he was purchasing 800 acres, and he bought an easement to go into the property. But when we were negotiating the purchase of that easement, we purchased the easement wide enough that if he ever decided to sell, that he had that 70-foot easement, and that property would eventually be able to be developed. So if we would have only purchased a 30-foot easement, then in the future, when somebody wanted to develop it, they would have had to go back and get additional easement from somebody. And so purchasing this up front and negotiating the deal allows that property, to be subdivided in the future or be a development in the future because of that access. And so just that little change in the negotiation will make a huge difference for him or his family in the future if they ever decide to sell that property. And so my C is CC&Rs, and this kind of is, you know, is in line with the rights of the property and your CC&Rs. But this is going to tell you, hey, when somebody split up this big chunk of land into these tinier pieces, they made these rules because these are the people, you know, they wanted all these properties to abide by these certain rules. And what are those rules, you know? Can you have farm animals? That's a question we get asked a lot in Idaho. Am I allowed to have a fence? What type of home do I have to build here? The maximum or minimum square footage, that goes into the pricing and also attributes value to the land. Sometimes CC&Rs can raise the property value because everything around it is going to be so nice. And sometimes it can limit things that you can do with the land and decrease the property value. So that's something that I look at whenever I'm pricing out a piece of land. If a piece of land has no HOA, no CC&Rs, then that piece of land can possibly have more things done with it. You know, maybe you can build your tiny home neighborhood that you were looking for, or put in an RV park. When a property has no HOA and no CC&Rs, it's open to more options and things that you can do with it. And usually that increases the value as long as it's in a good location. So our last C that I like to talk about is the cost to develop the property. So right here we have a well. So it already has a well installed, and that is one of our utilities. We have a power box, and so the power has already been taken on this particular lot from the transformer all the way back to the center of the property where the build line would be. And so for this particular property, it's also already been perked, so it's ready for a septic to be installed. And all of that adds value to the property. If your utilities are 10 miles down the road, God, that's gonna be so expensive to have Idaho Power, right, come in and bring the utilities 10 miles to the property. So you like to look at where your utilities are located, and that goes into the cost of actually developing the property. Another thing that's involved in the cost is how much usable land you have. There was a lady that called me, and she had 40 acres in Donley. You would think that would be worth, you know, millions of dollars. There was no HOA, no CC&Rs. But that property had been flood irrigated for hundreds of years, and it was all deemed wetlands. So there wasn't really buildable space. It wasn't close to utilities. It was all wetlands. That value was just really set as grazing land, which wouldn't hold as high of a value as something that would be able to be turned into a subdivision. Another cost to develop that would be under this category is subdividing. You know, has the lot ever been split before? The counties do allow for an original split on certain size parcels, and you can go back and do title research to see if your property has ever been split before and if that's an option. If it's not, then you would go through a subdivision process. You would want the cost of that, right? What does that look like? You're gonna have to pay for surveying. You're going to have an engineer draw up plans that mark out utilities. If they're on well and septic, you're gonna wanna have all those perk tests done for septic to make sure that each lot is going to be able to have utilities. And all of this comes into, you know, the cost to develop that land and what it could potentially be worth. Another thing that defines an usable area, not only wetlands, but hillside. You know, we are a mountain community. We have a lot of mountains out here in Idaho. Sometimes you'll see a property and it's $50,000 and you're like, man, why is that property so cheap? Well, when you drive out there, you find out why. It's a super steep upslope, you know, super down. You don't have a lot of buildable area, and your cost to excavate that and make a usable space is going to really offset the price of the actual land. Your cost to develop is going to be so much higher, and that's why that land is so inexpensive. And don't forget about paved or non-paved roads. There are some buyers that call in and request specifically only to be on a paved road. So that also will add or subtract value to your land. If you're buying or selling land, go through this process and look at other properties that are on the market and compare your property to how it matches up with other things that have sold or other things that are currently active using this checklist. And so if you're looking at selling or buying land and you don't have time to go through this, I'm definitely willing to help you out. I have a lot of experience with it. Give me a call anytime.